Mina the Hollower was clearly born as a passion project within Yacht Club Games, and this is felt in every detail disclosed so far. The idea began as a side project by Alec Faulkner to sharpen technical and artistic skills, not as a product designed from the start for the commercial market. The transition from personal project to studio title brings advantages and tensions. On one hand, there is a very cohesive artistic vision. The appeal to the Game Boy Color aesthetic and the self-imposed limitations show aesthetic maturity. On the other, professionalization required crowdfunding and greater coordination, which obviously extended deadlines and raised expectations. The game possesses an almost obsessive care for retro fidelity. It is not just style, it is deliberate technical limitation, restricted palette, no 3D, to recreate the feel of a handheld, and this indicates a team willing to sacrifice modern shortcuts for artistic coherence. At the same time, the development process showed pragmatism, releasing the demo, accepting feedback, and delaying the original Halloween 2025 release to polish the game, and balancing reveals that Yacht Club does not just want nostalgia. They want to deliver quality and multi-platform stability. A responsible stance, albeit frustrating for fans. Funding via Kickstarter and other sources generated over $1.2 million in total, evidencing that the project grew beyond the internal scope. Now there is an audience that financed expectations, and this adds public pressure and a need for transparency in the schedule, something the team has managed with clear announcements regarding delays and polishing goals. Another striking aspect is the technical and scope ambition. Reports from Yacht Club itself calling Mina the most ambitious project in our history, and the care with localization, testing on various platforms, and submissions show a studio that learned from Shovel Knight and wants to raise the standard without losing its indie identity. In the end, Mina's development context conveys a rare mix today. A humble and personal beginning, community funding that legitimizes the vision, and the maturity of a studio that prefers to delay to polish. For those who, like me, played the demo, this translates into a feeling of fulfilled promise in aesthetics and potential. It remains to be hoped that the polishing does not dilute the original personality that made the project come to life. The story gives me a very good feeling of a compact, gothic tale, one of those that seem simple on the surface, but carry a very specific vibe underneath. From the demo and what has been disclosed, I feel that the game aims less at surprising with giant plot twists and more at involving you with atmosphere, curiosity, in a world that already seems broken before you even understand everything. What catches my attention most is how direct the premise is. Mina goes to Tenebrous Isle to understand why the generators she created herself stopped working, and this already creates an interesting personal weight. It is not the classic save the world just because adventure. There is a responsibility of hers at the center of the plot, and this gives a much stronger emotional layer to the journey. I also like the way Yacht Club is selling the story as something scary yet welcoming at the same time. This makes me think that the narrative will not rely only on dark horror, but on strange characters, small connections, and a type of melancholy that fits very well with this Victorian Gothic-inspired world. After seeing the demo, I was left with the impression that the story is still being kept under wraps with great care, and this can be great. There are games that deliver too much at the beginning and lose impact, but here it seems the developer wants to use the demo only to present the tone, the mission, and the feeling of isolation without dismantling the mystery ahead of time. Another point that works very well for me is the conflict with Thorn, because it gives the plot an antagonist with a clear function within this collapse. When the story adds a betrayal linked to the island's own protection system, the drama stops being just an environmental mystery and becomes also a fall of trust within the world that Mina helped build. From what has been shown so far, I have the feeling that the strength of Mina the Hollower's story is more in the mood than in the complexity of the script. And honestly, this pleases me, because not every narrative needs to be full of verbal layers to function. Sometimes it is enough to have a well-defined protagonist, a striking setting, and a problem that makes sense emotionally. I thought the story seems promising precisely because it does not try to sound too grand. It feels intimate, dark, and very aligned with the game's identity. And this leaves me curious to see how Mina's relationship with this cursed island will develop when the game is finally released. My impression of the gameplay is of a game that wants to look simple at first glance, but which was clearly thought out to have real depth. The demo and the material released convey that pleasant feeling of direct action, only with a set of tools that demands reading, timing, and constant adaptation. What hooked me the most was the combat with ranged weapons, sidearms, and the main whip, because it gives personality to the game's rhythm. It does not seem to be that type of action where you just press attack and walk forward. On the contrary, there is room to choose distance, control enemies, and even mold your way of playing with different weapons. The burrowing mechanic, honestly, is the heart of the gameplay for me. It does not seem to be just a visual trick or a locomotion skill. It changes how you read the scenario, traverse dangers, and even how you think about defense and attack, which is exactly the type of mechanic that makes a game stay in your memory. I also like the fact that the developer showed a game with a classic look, but with modern responses. The official page speaks of precise controls, exploration in interconnected levels, and a progression system that adjusts Mina to the player's style. And this gives me the impression of a design that respects the past without being stuck in it. From the demo, I felt a somewhat dry learning curve at the beginning, but in a good way. The game does not seem afraid to throw you into the middle of the action and let you figure things out in practice, which matches very well with this type of more demanding retro adventure and also gives an identity of its own to the experience. Another point that makes me curious is how exploration and combat seem to walk together instead of being separate parts. When you see the ability to dig, cross obstacles, manipulate the terrain, and use secondary tools, it becomes clear that the game wants you to think of the map as part of the combat, not just as a corridor between fights. I thought Mina the Hollower's gameplay seems very solid because it mixes precision, creativity, and personality without relying on exaggeration. It gives me the feeling of a game made for those who like to learn systems, master movement, and feel that every tool really matters. And that is exactly the type of thing that makes me want to go back for another demo or for the full game. Mina the Hollower has a type of graphic that does not try to impress by the amount of detail, but by the identity. And for me, that is precisely what makes the visuals work so well. It seems to take the handheld aesthetic and transform it into something with presence, personality, and the finish of a modern game. What catches my attention most is that the graphics are not stuck only in nostalgia. They use the limitation as language. The reduced palette, the well-defined sprites, and the use of perspective create a visual that looks like a classic, but does not sound like a cheap copy of the era. There is an artistic care there that you can feel right in the first few minutes. In the demo, I had the feeling that everything was designed to convey mood before conveying richness, and that is very intelligent. The scenarios do not need to be crammed with elements to transmit discomfort, mystery, and that air of gothic adventure. Often, a simple corridor or a dark area already says a lot because the game knows exactly where to put contrast and silhouette. The characters also help a lot in this impression. Mina has a very good visual reading, and that matters a lot in a game of this type. Even with the retro look, she is easy to recognize in motion, and the enemies have a presence that matches the game's tone. Nothing feels generic, and this gives strength to the set. The most interesting thing is that the graphic style communicates with the gameplay all the time. When the game asks for fast movement, screen reading, and immediate reaction, the art responds with clarity. There is no visual excess hindering the action, and this makes the graphics seem functional in addition to beautiful. For me, this balance is one of the project's greatest merits. I also think it is important to say that this visual does not try to be just cute or just dark. It stays in a very intelligent middle ground. It has charm, but it has strangeness. It has nostalgia, but it has its own personality. This mix makes the game not depend only on the retro trick to grab attention. Overall, my impression is that Mina the Hollower has graphics that understand exactly what they want to be. It is not about competing with ultra-realistic games, but about creating a striking, coherent, and stylish image. And honestly, it is the type of visual that makes me trust the project even before it comes out complete. What I felt in the demo is that the performance seems designed to be stable and consistent, not to impress with excess effects. This matches very well with the type of visuals and gameplay that the game proposes, because everything there depends on fast response, clean screen reading, and a sense of control. Even without getting into technical numbers, the general impression is that of a game that runs with good fluidity and without drawing attention to itself on the negative side. And for me, that is great, because when a game of this style lags, stutters, or loses precision, the experience collapses very quickly. The point that gives me the most confidence is that the visual proposal is relatively contained. Since the game works with a well-acknowledged retro aesthetic, it does not seem to want to push the hardware for unnecessary things, and this usually helps a lot to keep performance at a comfortable level. While playing the demo, I did not have that feeling that the game was fighting its own style. On the contrary, it seemed well aligned between art, movement, and command response. For an action game with exploration, this is worth much more than simply having beautiful effects. What I think is most important here is that good performance is not just in the frame rate, but in reading the game's response to your input. Mina moves in a way that needs to feel precise, and the demo conveys precisely that impression of firm control without noticeable lag that ruins the action. Of course, there is always that natural caution with demo versions, because not everything represents the final state. But from what has been shown so far by the developer, the direction seems to be of a well-polished game with a clear priority on stability. The performance left me more relieved than worried. It is not the type of game that makes me think of a technical spectacle, but rather of a project that knows exactly what it needs to deliver to work well. And honestly, for this type of game, this is already a very strong sign of a job well done. If you are in doubt about whether to buy Mina the Holler at launch, or wait a little, I can tell you that based on the demo and everything Yacht Club Games has shown so far, I am buying it on day one without thinking twice. It is not because I am a YouTuber and need the content. It is because the demo convinced me that the game is already at the point of delivering a complete and solid experience from the very first minute. What gives me this confidence is the studio's track record. After Shovel Knight, Yacht Club proved that it knows how to release games with impeccable finish. And in Mina's case, the delay from 2025 to May 2026 did not seem like a sign of trouble to me, but of care. They had extra time to polish, balance, and ensure that the game arrives stable on all platforms, which for me weighs heavily in favor of a day one purchase. Now, who do I recommend this game to? If you enjoy action and adventure with exploration, if you like that loop of discovering a new area, getting a tool, and going back to unlock previous paths, Mina seems tailored for you. It is recommended for those who appreciate honest challenge, pixel art with identity, and that vibe of games like Link's Awakening and Castlevania, but with a pinch of modernity in the precision of the controls. On the other hand, if you are the type who prefers to wait to see complete reviews, or if the more old-school difficulty scares you, maybe it is worth waiting a few days after launch. Not because the game seems problematic, but because some people simply like to be absolutely sure before investing, and in that case, waiting a week will not change the essence of the game. The point that makes me defend buying at launch is the feeling of being part of the collective discovery. Mina the Hollower looks like a game that will generate a lot of conversation about hidden secrets, boss strategies, and lore theories. And being in this initial moment with the community is an experience that no money can buy later. For those who follow the indie scene closely, the social value counts a lot. At the end of the day, my opinion is direct. If you identify with what I described, buy it at launch. The game has pedigree, the demo delivered quality, the date is knocking at the door, and Yacht Club has already shown that it respects the player. I will be there on May 28th, ready to dig deep into this cursed island. And if you like this type of adventure, I will see you there.